Scary Movie is doomed to fail. There was a time when Scary Movie was unstoppable. It made fun of everyone and everything. It had a tiny budget, brought in an absolute fortune, and turned the most politically incorrect humor imaginable into a global phenomenon until something changed. The formula wore out. And it wasn't just because the times changed. The franchise was created by the Wayans brothers, but Hollywood stole it from them. The now infamous executive Harvey Weinstein turned these movies into soulless cash grabs. Now, the Wayans are back with a new installment, but capturing that original success seems like an impossible mission. Can Scary Movie really make a comeback in an era where everything already feels like a parody? To understand why this new movie could be a total disaster, we need to go back in time and look closely at every film in the franchise. Hit subscribe, drop a like, and get ready for a story that is anything but funny. It's filled with shattered dreams, backstabbing, exploitation, opportunism, and burnout. To explain why Scary Movie is doomed, we first need to talk about the movie that made its existence possible. Scream. Released in 1996, it revitalized the slasher genre. You know, those movies with masked killers chasing teenagers around. And not only that, the characters actually knew the rules of horror movies and talked about cliches within their own script. This self-awareness and meta-humor fascinated Hollywood. And whenever a formula works, copycats quickly follow, along with parodies. That's where the Wayans brothers came in as the gold standard. By the late 90s, the Wayans were the champions of wild, over-the-top humor thanks to their movies and the TV show In Living Color. The creative mastermind was Keenen Ivory Wayans, alongside his brothers Shawn and Marlon. They built a brand of humor around mockery and being politically incorrect, completely destroying the boundaries of good taste. They parodied whatever was trending, and they definitely weren't going to miss out on taking aim at the Scream phenomenon, including its influences and all its ripoffs. So they wrote a script with a title no one could forget. Last summer, I screamed because Halloween fell on Friday the 13th. Yeah, they didn't want to leave anyone out. They weren't just making fun of horror, they were taking on the entire language of teen movies, the absurdly gratuitous adult scenes, racial cliches, and even the hypocritical morals of the genre. The script immediately caught the attention of the exact same studio that produced Scream, Miramax. This was a company run by the most successful and feared executive of that era, Harvey Weinstein. If that name sets off alarm bells for you, it should, because Scary Movie wasn't going to get a happy ending in the hands of a Weinstein. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Harvey and his brother Bob Weinstein bought the project. The Wayans signed a contract that seemed pretty reasonable at first. They didn't know it at the time, but they had just handed over the keys to their creation to the exact same people who would later lock them out. Going back to the beginning, the problems that would plague the entire franchise started almost immediately. Miramax had also acquired another parody script with a pretty similar title, Scream If I Know What You Did Last Halloween, written by Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer. Harvey Weinstein handed that material over to the Wayans and asked them to pull some ideas from it for a new draft. Keenen and his brothers thought it was so terrible that they just ignored it and moved forward with their own script. Their story followed a group of teenagers who cover up a crime and are later picked off by a masked psychopath. Basically a mashup of Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. In fact, the main character is named Cindy Campbell, a shameless nod to Sidney Prescott, the final girl played by Neve Campbell in Scream. But the problems had only just begun. Miramax set the budget at $19 million, which was pretty modest even back then. To keep costs down, the Wayans had to filming in Canada and couldn't afford to bring in any massive stars. That's why Shawn and Marlon starred in the movie alongside a cast of virtual unknowns. The role of Cindy went to Anna Faris, who had only been acting in totally obscure independent movies up to that point, and never as a lead. But the corporate mandates didn't stop there. Harvey Weinstein forced them to use a new title, Scary Movie, which actually happened to be the original working title for Scream, right up until Weinstein himself changed it. Filming for Scary Movie took place between August and October of 1999, and the cultural landscape couldn't have been more perfect for a movie like this. For starters, sci-fi and horror were churning out new classics. The Matrix and The Sixth Sense had just been released, and the Wayans quickly tossed in parodies of both. On top of that, politically incorrect comedies were completely dominating the box office, thanks to movies like There's Something About Mary, American Pie, and Road Trip. At the same time, spoof movies were making a big comeback, with Austin Powers leading the charge. Audiences were absolutely eating up this kind of offensive, over-the-top humor. The path seemed clear for the Wayans and Scary Movie, but no one expected what happened next. It opened on July 7, 2000, and topped the box office in its first weekend, pulling in $42 million. And remember, it only cost $19 million to make. It ended up grossing $278 million. Suddenly, this raunchy, chaotic comedy became the highest-grossing film directed by a black filmmaker and the most successful R-rated movie up to that point. The reviews were brutal, but absolutely no one cared. The unexpected success of Scary Movie brought even more tension along with it. Before the release, the Wayans discovered that the Writers Guild had given writing credits to Friedberg and Seltzer, even though not a single one of their ideas was actually used. But there was an even bigger problem. The brothers had put a tagline on the poster that read, "No mercy, no shame, no sequel." They wanted to make it clear that the movie was a one-and-done event. The joke was perfect, but the problem is that Hollywood doesn't get jokes when there are millions of dollars on the table. The second they blew up the box office, Harvey Weinstein immediately announced a sequel. Scary Movie was so huge that Hollywood reacted exactly the way they did with Scream, the movie it was parodying. They wanted to milk it as fast as possible, no matter the consequences. So it started to turn into the very thing it swore to destroy, and the conflicts escalated. In August 2000, Harvey Weinstein announced Scary Movie 2. The Wayans agreed to make a sequel, but they asked for time to write a good script. Weinstein didn't just say no. He set a release date for July 4th, 2001. That meant they had less than a year to make the entire movie. It didn't matter if there was a good story, a good idea, or even a good movie. The only thing that mattered was hitting that deadline. That kind of logic would eventually doom the franchise. Knowing this, the Wayans could have walked away, but they weren't about to let go of their most successful project that easily. Even so, it didn't take long for the problems to show up. While rushing to write the script, the Wayans tried to keep the project's identity intact and came up with a story about Cindy and her friends in a haunted house. But there was one huge issue. There just weren't enough recent horror hits to parody, so they had to dig up classics from decades past, like Poltergeist. The franchise was already running the risk of repeating itself, but the worst was yet to come. Filming for Scary Movie 2 started in February 2001, and the Wayans felt the pressure right away. They had just 5 months to shoot, edit, and release the movie, a totally unheard-of timeline for a Hollywood production. While Keenen Ivory directed scenes at breakneck speed, Shawn and Marlon rewrote the script whenever they weren't on camera. At the same time, everyone had to put up with Harvey Weinstein, who demanded more jokes and a faster pace every single day. The success of the first movie had convinced him that the real secret was just piling on the gags without worrying too much about the story. But that wasn't the Wayans' only nightmare. This time around, Miramax gave them a $45 million budget, but they were only allowed to use it to hire big names. Marlon Brando was brought in for the opening sequence, a parody of The Exorcist. However, the legendary star was dealing with serious health issues and had to drop out after just one day on set. The scene had to be completely reshot, this time with James Woods. Brando's involvement was scrapped, which would have been his final movie role. He passed away 3 years later. Despite all the headaches and studio mandates, Scary Movie 2 hit theaters right on schedule and turned out to be another hit. It pulled in $141 million, proving that highly irreverent humor still had huge mainstream appeal. It was also still a great era for horror and movies built on pop culture references and self-awareness, like Shrek. The critics were even more brutal this time around, but once again, nobody paid any attention to them. The first 2 Scary Movie films were chaotic, raunchy, and exhausting to make, but they still held on to one crucial element, the Wayans brothers' identity. That was exactly what Hollywood decided to strip away for the third movie. After the success of Scary Movie 2, the Wayans were ready for a third installment, but they felt the franchise needed better working conditions to keep things fresh. They wanted more time to write, a longer production schedule, and better pay. They weren't happy with how the second movie turned out and had no intention of repeating that nightmare experience. The Weinsteins, however, wouldn't budge. They offered them a deal similar to the one for the first movie, completely ignoring the fact that the brothers were the actual creators of the brand. Negotiations dragged on for months, until the Weinsteins just stopped returning their calls. The brothers didn't know it yet, but it would take over 20 years for them to finally return to their own franchise. And when that finally happened, it would be under the absolute worst possible circumstances for the Weinsteins. But we'll get to that. The Wayans didn't hear a word until Christmas Eve 2002, when they saw on the news that Scary Movie 3 was officially in production without them. That was the real turning point for the franchise. The Wayans finally realized that the Weinsteins had tossed them aside so they could keep the series and milk it however they wanted. They were hurt and furious, but picking a legal fight with 2 of the most powerful men in Hollywood wasn't exactly a smart move. Instead, they focused on other projects. They would never forget their box office baby, But one thing was crystal clear. The studio system had swallowed their parody whole and was now gearing up to mass produce it on an assembly line. Now, Scary Movie 3 was entirely in the hands of Miramax, and at first they had no idea what to do with the franchise. The Weinsteins initially brought in Kevin Smith to write and produce, but he quickly backed out. Around that time, the plan was actually to parody Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings. After that fell through, they shifted gears and reached out to David Zucker, one of the undisputed masters of the spoof genre thanks to comedy classics like Airplane and The Naked Gun. However, his most recent movies had bombed, and he desperately needed a hit. He accepted Miramax's offer and was allowed to build the project from the ground up. But the real driving force behind Scary Movie 3 wasn't Zucker. It was Miramax. Right out of the gate, Harvey Weinstein laid down strict rules to distance the movie from what the Wayans had done. First and foremost, it had to be rated PG-13, and the script had to spoof the two biggest recent horror hits, M. Night Shyamalan's Signs and The Ring. On top of that, he locked in a $48 million budget, cast recognizable names like Charlie Sheen, and brought in Leslie Nielsen to serve as the comedic anchor. The only major connection to the first two movies was Anna Faris. She was loyal to the Wayans, but the paycheck was just too good to pass up. Even with a new creative team, the production of Scary Movie 3 was even more chaotic. Zucker and his team were hired in December 2002, with a release date set for October 9, 2003. Once again, they had less than a year to get it done. Zucker wanted to bring in his trademark gags, but Harvey Weinstein wouldn't let him. Even though he still wanted the movie to appeal to a younger crowd, he insisted they cram in more raunchy, adult humor. Despite everything, Scary Movie 3 grossed $220 million. As usual, the critics tore it apart. But this time, the fans were pushing back too. A lot of people felt it just wasn't the same anymore. The Wayans didn't just drop pop culture references, they actively made fun of it. The third movie, on the other hand, had devolved into a frantic pile of jokes about famous movies. Those red flags didn't faze Miramax. The Weinsteins wanted to keep milking their cash cow, so they greenlit a fourth installment. And this is where the beginning of the end really started. In just a few years, Scary Movie had become the Weinsteins' most profitable franchise, and they wanted to push it to the absolute limit. But production on Scary Movie 4 kicked off right in the middle of a corporate crisis. In September 2005, the brothers left Miramax to launch their own studio, the Weinstein Company. Even so, they held onto the rights for the franchise and locked in a release date for the fourth movie, April 14, 2006. They needed to prove, and fast, that they could keep their flagship franchise alive on their own. To make that happen, they brought back Zucker and recurring stars like Sheen, Nielsen, and Faris. The actress still missed the Wayans, but once again, she took the job for the paycheck. The budget was set at $40 million, and the executives used it to hire more familiar faces and, most importantly, stuff the movie with as many references as possible. For some reason, Weinstein was totally convinced that all the Scary Movie audience cared about was seeing how many movie jokes they could recognize. Like the previous sequels, the movie had only a few months of production, and Harvey Weinstein controlled every single second. First, he ordered the script to specifically spoof Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds and the Saw franchise. Then, he forced the team to cram in jokes about any blockbuster that came out while they were filming. That led to a total chaos of rewrites, improvised scenes, and reshoots that happened even during post-production. Zucker didn't even try to argue anymore. The third movie had revived his career, so he decided to just follow the studio's orders and deliver exactly the movie they asked for. Plus, a lot of you probably remember that around this time, the sheer amount of spoof movies Hollywood was pumping out to copy Scary Movie's success was just insane and ridiculous. Just to name a few: Date Movie, which spoofed romantic comedies; Disaster Movie, you can guess what that was about; Superhero Movie, and even another gay movie. If you don't believe me, Google it. This movie actually existed and had a theatrical release. Obviously, a massive reality check was approaching at breakneck speed. The final downfall came with Scary Movie 5. The Scary Movie franchise survived internal conflicts, chaotic productions, and brutal reviews, but the movies just kept raking in cash. That is, until the fifth installment came along, and the whole thing finally collapsed. The picture for the fifth movie was bleak right from the start. After the massive success of Scary Movie, other studios started copying the formula without actually understanding what made it work in the first place. By the early 2000s, Hollywood had completely flooded the spoof genre. Friedberg and Seltzer, the guys credited on the first movie, started pumping out movies like Date Movie. At the same time, audiences were changing too. Politically incorrect comedies were getting pushed aside for smarter comedies with more developed characters and mature themes. Absurd quick-hit humor didn't disappear entirely, but it did find a new home, hitting its peak on the internet. The changing times didn't scare the Weinsteins, because in June 2012, they announced Scary Movie 5. They planned to reboot the franchise with new characters, but they wanted to keep Faris around. They knew she was the heart of these movies. She never stopped feeling like the franchise really belonged to the Wayans, and when she heard the pitch for the 5th installment, she decided to walk away from the project. And just like that, Scary Movie lost whatever little identity it had left. Despite the setbacks, the Weinsteins weren't going to let anything stop Scary Movie 5. Since they wanted to prioritize their prestige films, they set the budget at $20 million this time around, which was almost exactly what the first movie cost. They went with a classic Hollywood strategy: spend as little as possible and milk the brand recognition. Instead of hiring top-tier actors, they brought in celebrities from other fields, fresh faces, and stars who were going through a rough patch, like Lindsay Lohan. On top of that, they chose to cut costs by mainly spoofing Paranormal Activity, a massive horror hit made on a shoestring budget. But it just so happened that Paranormal Activity had inspired another comedy that was already in production, A Haunted House, starring and co-written by Marlon Wayans. Even though their relationship had ended on terrible terms, the Weinsteins actually tried to buy the rights. The actor turned them down, and years later he said he saw right through their true intentions. They wanted to buy the movie just to steal all its ideas and then scrap it. That failed negotiation didn't stop the Weinsteins either. They called Zucker again, but he didn't want to put himself through another torturous experience and stayed on as a producer instead. Directing duties were handed over to Malcolm D. Lee, a director known for pretty forgettable comedies and mostly famous for being Spike Lee's cousin. But the real authority behind Scary Movie 5 was still Harvey Weinstein. He took control of yet another production that turned out to be the most chaotic in the entire franchise. Filming took place between September and October of 2012, and during that time the producer demanded more parodies, more adult humor, and a much faster pace. Then the movie went into post-production, aiming for a release date of April 12, 2013. But Weinstein put a hard stop to that in January 2013. He ordered Lee to filming new parodies of movies that were either currently tearing up the box office or hadn't even come out yet, like Mama and Evil Dead. By the end of its run, the franchise was basically just functioning as a desperate machine trying to keep up with pop culture. But this time, Harvey Weinstein's micromanaging wasn't enough to save it. Scary Movie 5 grossed just $78 million, marking the absolute worst box office performance in the franchise. The few people who actually went to see it all agreed that it felt like the final nail in the coffin for modern spoof movies. Faced with that reality, the greedy brothers finally stopped churning out sequels. As far as Hollywood and audiences were concerned, the Scary Movie franchise was dead and buried. But just like the horror monsters it made fun of, it was about to come back from the grave. For years, the Scary Movie franchise felt like a relic from another era. It was heavily associated with the excesses of the 2000s, gross-out humor, and a Hollywood completely obsessed with milking trends until they were destroyed. And then something unexpected happened. The original creators came back to try and bring it back to life. Everything started to change in 2017 when Harvey Weinstein fell from grace following the allegations and convictions for sexual misconduct. The producer, who had controlled and exploited the franchise, lost all his power in Hollywood, and his brother Bob and their shady business practices vanished right along with him. Finally, the industry was starting to change. These developments opened up an unexpected door for the Wayans brothers. Since Scary Movie 2, they had made other movies, including the previously mentioned A Haunted House and its sequel, but they never forgot about their biggest creation. Now that the system that kicked them out was gone, in April 2024, they were able to sit down and negotiate with the new leadership at Miramax. They wanted to revive the franchise. After all, the nostalgia factor was proving to be a safe bet in Hollywood. Both sides struck a deal where the brothers finally got creative control. So after decades of Hollywood thinking it could make Scary Movie without the Wayans, the industry finally had to admit they were wrong. In fact, the new movie would be a co-production with Ugly Baby Productions, Marlon's company. He even said it himself in an interview. You can't do Wayans stuff without the Wayans. With a deal in place, the Wayans mapped out a massive comeback titled Scary Movie. Yeah, just like the very first one, but with a solid excuse. They were making a requel, a mashup of a remake and a sequel, just like two of the horror hits they were planning to spoof, Halloween and Scream. Marlon and Shawn were set to return as the stars and co-writers, though Keenen Ivory stepped back into a producer role this time around. To direct, they tapped Michael Tidis, who they had previously worked with on A Haunted House. They even managed to get a huge chunk of the original cast back together, including Anna Faris. She agreed to come back specifically because the Wayans were calling the shots again. Thanks to their new level of control over the franchise, the Wayans were able to shoot the new Scary Movie between October and November 2025. They had total creative freedom, with no internal chaos or desperate executives rewriting scenes at the last minute. That same vibe of creativity and respect carried over into post-production. Nobody was forced to rush, since the release date wasn't set until June 12, 2026. Plus, they were finally able to make an R-rated movie again, which hadn't happened since the second installment. Just like that, they brought back the one thing the franchise had been missing for a very long time: its identity. With their return to the franchise, the Wayans set out to recapture that original magic. But does the new movie really have a chance at a triumphant comeback? The teaser drove fans crazy, to the point where the release date got bumped up to June 5th. Plus, the Wayans had plenty of material to make fun of. In recent years, horror has been more alive than ever. We've seen everything from remakes and sequels to so-called elevated horror, not to mention Stephen King adaptations and new classics like The Substance, Longlegs, and Weapons. Some of these standouts were even made by black filmmakers. In fact, director Jordan Peele practically begged the Wayans to spoof his movies, starting with Get Out. But the brothers are also facing a major challenge. The world that turned scary movie into a phenomenon just doesn't exist anymore. Today, Hollywood produces movies that are heavily sanitized to avoid offending anyone. Instead, bold, edgy humor has found its home on the internet. 2 decades ago, a movie spoof could feel fresh because it came out right after a trend had peaked. Now memes and TikTok tear any movie apart the second a trailer drops. Digital culture has figured out how to do parodies in real time. And there's another issue. The audience has changed. Jokes about race, religion, or sexuality spark massive debates these days and can destroy entire careers. Even so, Marlon Wayans said they are determined to cancel the cancel culture itself. Will they actually pull it off? Right out of the gate, a controversy already came to light. The studio forced them to cut a Terrifier spoof where Art the Clown uses explosives in a mall. But when a clip of it showed up in the trailer, the brothers pushed hard to get it put back in the movie. They won, proving that they are finally the masters of their own franchise. But they know the final verdict belongs to the audience. What do you guys think? Will Scary Movie resurrect the franchise and bring back those wild parodies, or is it going to be a massive flop? Let us know in the comments. A cursed internet image turned into a Hollywood movie. It looks like a normal photo, but something isn't right.